Good evening, I'm James Ezimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Israel accuses Iran of violating Trump-brokered ceasefire. Iran denies the allegation. NATO summit kicks off in the Netherlands amid global instability. Deadly strikes on Ukraine injured 160 people. Tensions remain high in the Middle East as a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, brokered by US President Donald Trump, appears to be unraveling just hours after it took effect. Israel has accused Iran of violating the truce, while Tehran denies the claims and points to continued Israeli airstrikes.
Tensions flared again on Tuesday as Israel accuses Iran of breaching a newly brokered ceasefire just hours after both sides agreed to halt hostilities. The truce, announced by US President Donald Trump and facilitated by Qatar, was meant to take effect shortly after 5 a.m. GMT. President Donald Trump expressed frustration with both Israel and Iran as the ceasefire appeared to falter.
But I'm not happy that Israel's going out now. There was one rocket that I guess was fired overboard. It was after the time limit and it missed its target. And now Israel's going out. These guys got to calm down. Ridiculous.
On his Truth Social, he posted that Israeli fighter jets would turn around and not attack Iran. Israel's defense ministry claimed Tehran had launched further missile attacks in violation of the deal, vowing a forceful response with fresh strikes on Iranian targets. Iran, however, denied launching any missiles and said Israeli airstrikes continued for over an hour after the ceasefire began. The fragile truce followed 12 days of conflict that began when Israel struck Iranian targets on June 13th, citing nuclear threats. Iran responded with attacks on a US base in Qatar, which it said were retaliation for American strikes on its 3 nuclear facilities.
Now we go to Jagriti Dave, who brings us the latest from Washington, D.C.
President Trump was clearly angry when he was answering questions from reporters as he was leaving for the NATO summit at The Hague. In comments which included an expletive, he said both sides had been fighting for so long they don't know what they're doing. He said both sides violated the ceasefire, but he was, quote, unhappy with Israel. That unhappiness was also apparent in his social media posts. On his Truth Social platform, President Trump wrote in capital letters, "Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now." He also followed up with a call to his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, a call that was described by the White House as firm and direct. But it's early days in this fragile truce. Iran's response to the US's bombing of its nuclear facilities, a retaliatory strike on a US airbase in Qatar with advanced warning, was taken as a sign that Tehran didn't want to escalate further. Israel has also said it agreed to the ceasefire because it had achieved its operational goals in Iran. Mr. Trump is insisting a ceasefire is in effect and that Israel is not going to attack Iran. But this moment is likely to be yet another test of the US president's influence over its close ally. Jagriti Dave for A News in Washington, D.C.
The ceasefire announced by President Trump is already under strain, with Israel accusing Iran of violating the deal just hours in. Trent Moore reports from Tel Aviv.
The ceasefire announced overnight by US President Donald Trump already appears to be on shaky ground here, with Israel accusing Iran of breaching the conditions of the ceasefire agreement. They are saying that less than 3 hours after it coming into force, that they detected 2 ballistic missiles being fired towards the north of Israel. They are saying that they did intercept them, and residents in the north of the country are reporting hearing those interceptions take place. We are hearing from the IDF Chief of General Staff, who is saying that the Army and the Air Force is preparing to respond with force. Now, Iranian state media is denying that the Iranian military launched these ballistic missiles, but at the same time, the country's top security council has said that it has no trust in the words of its enemies, and it will be keeping its finger on the trigger to respond to any further act of aggression. Undoubtedly, it is now going to be a critical few hours ahead to see whether this delicate ceasefire can hold or whether these two sides are going to continue these skirmishes. We do know that here in Israel, they have not removed the current state of emergency in place. Schools remain closed, businesses remain shut, and the IDF Home Command is telling Israelis that there is still a danger and that they need to make sure they know where their nearest bomb shelter is. Trent Murray for A News, Tel Aviv.
Iran's foreign minister has signaled a possible halt to hostilities starting from 4 a.m. Tehran time, provided Israel ceases what he called illegal aggression. This comes amid mixed messages on whether formal ceasefire is in place and following reports of fresh Israeli and Iranian strikes. Turaj Shiralilu has more from Tehran.
Foreign Minister Araghchi, in a message on his X account, announced a lull in the fightings starting from 4 a.m. Tehran local time, with effect on the 12th day of the war. He said, if Israel stops its illegal aggression against the Iranian people no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time, Iran has no intention to continue its response afterwards. However, earlier in the day, there was an uncertainty about a ceasefire status. As Araghchi wrote in a separate message, there is no agreement on any ceasefire or cessation of military operations. Hours before the ceasefire, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it fired missiles against Israel and also reported of attacks on the U.S. military bases in Qatar and Iraq on Monday night, in reprisal for targeting of Iran's nuclear sites on Sunday. Also, the Supreme National Security Council, in a statement, said it was Tehran which imposed the ceasefire on the U.S. and Israel, and that it will respond strongly to its violation. It said, Iran's brave armed forces responded to any aggression in the past 12 days, including by hitting the U.S. bases as well as the targets inside Israel hours before the ceasefire. The statement added, Iran's armed forces do not believe the statements of the enemies and are ready to give a strong and crushing response to their aggressions. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
Iran has launched missiles at the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar on Monday in response to American airstrikes at the weekend. Qatar says it intercepted the attack with no casualties. Regional airspace was, however, briefly shut as authorities urge calm.
Explosions were heard across Doha on Monday as Iran launched what it called a devastating and powerful missile strike on the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest U.S. military facility in the region. The attack comes after U.S. forces dropped heavy bunker buster bombs on Iranian nuclear sites at the weekend. Tehran vowed retaliation. The response came swiftly. According to Qatar's Ministry of Defense, multiple missiles were intercepted mid-air by Qatari air defenses. Qatar says there were no casualties.
The state of Qatar condemns in the strongest terms the Iranian missile attack on the Qatari Al Udeid air base. This attack represents a flagrant violation of Qatar's sovereignty and contravenes the principles of good neighborliness and an assault on international legitimacy and international law. The state of Qatar affirms that it reserves the right to respond in accordance with international law and in proportion to the nature and scale of this attack.
Qatar closed its airspace shortly after the attack, diverting incoming flights. The UAE and Bahrain followed, shutting their skies amid regional tensions. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it launched the operation Annunciation of Victory, claiming responsibility for strikes on US bases in Qatar and also in Iraq. Tehran said in a statement that Iran will not leave any attack on its territorial integrity, sovereignty, and national security unanswered under any circumstances. Iranians took to the streets of Tehran on Monday to celebrate Iran's attack on the Al Udeid U.S. airbase in Qatar. On social media, U.S. President Donald Trump wrote that Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response, which we expected, and have very effectively countered. He thanked the Emir of Qatar for his efforts toward peace and said that early notice from Iran allowed U.S. forces to avoid casualties.
The United States has kept a significant military presence throughout the Middle East for years, but after a U.S. airstrike targeted Iran's nuclear sites, the Middle Eastern nation warned that it would strike back at American bases in the region.
Following the United States strike on 3 Iranian nuclear sites, Iran threatened retaliatory action on US bases in the region. A US base in Qatar was targeted by Iranian missiles, though no injuries were reported. The United States maintains a substantial troop presence across the Middle East. In Bahrain, the US Navy's 5th Fleet and US Naval Forces Central Command have been based since 1948, when Britain's Royal Navy first operated the facility. The country's deep-water port can accommodate America's largest military vessels, including aircraft carriers. In Kuwait, US troops arrived at Ali Al Salem Air Base in 1998 during a build-up against Iraq. Today, Ali Al Salem hosts the 386th Air Expeditionary Wing, described by the US military as its primary airlift hub and gateway for delivering combat power to joint and coalition forces. Kuwait is also home to Camp Arif Jan, the forward headquarters for the US Army component of Central Command, CENTCOM, along with several other American bases. Iraq hosts approximately 2,500 US troops as part of the international coalition against the Islamic State group. Despite its alliance with Iran, the Iraqi government is also a strategic partner of the United States. US forces operate at installations across the country, including Al-Assad and Erbil air bases. In Syria, US troops have been stationed at various locations for years as part of the coalition against the Islamic State group, which emerged from the Syrian civil war to control large areas of Syria and neighboring Iraq. The Pentagon announced in April that it would reduce its forces in Syria to fewer than 1,000 as part of a consolidation of its troop presence. In the United Arab Emirates, Al Dhafra Air Base hosts the US 380th Air Expeditionary Wing, which includes 10 squadrons equipped with aircraft and MQ-9 Reaper drones. Meanwhile, Qatar's Al Udeid Air Base houses forward elements of CENTCOM, US Air Forces, and Special Operations Forces in the region. The base supports rotating combat aircraft and the 379th Air Expeditionary Wing, which provides airlift, aerial refueling, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and aeromedical evacuation.
Leaders from all 32 NATO countries have gathered in the Netherlands for a landmark summit where a new defense spending target is on the table. The proposed 5% goal is being seen as a response to renewed pressure from the US President Donald Trump. However, this has raised concerns with some member and non-member states.
At a landmark NATO summit in the Netherlands, all 32 member states are expected to sign off on a new ambitious defence spending goal, 5% of national GDP. The new split would see 3.5% spent on core defence and the remaining 1.5% on related areas, from border security to energy resilience. The proposal aims to appease US President Donald Trump, who has repeatedly slammed allies for underspending. At his first summit as NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte described the commitment as a turning point.
Question number one was, Mark, is the US still with us? Yes, they are. You might want to turn on your television when Emmanuel Macron is visiting the Oval Office, when Keir Starmer is visiting the Oval Office, when Giorgia Meloni is... Hey, by the way, when I was visiting, you might want to see that footage. There is total commitment by the US President and the US senior leadership to NATO.
However, some challenges have been raised as Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez claimed his country had secured an opt-out.
The government of Spain has just reached an agreement with NATO. An agreement, in our view, that is very positive and will allow us to fulfill our commitments to the Atlantic Alliance and preserve something very important, its unity, without having to increase our defence spending to 5% of gross domestic product.
But not everyone is applauding NATO's bigger ambitions.
One cannot ignore the risks posed by NATO's expansion beyond its traditional area of responsibility, as it attempts to establish its presence in the Middle East, the South Caucasus, and Central Asia.
US President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that both Israel and Iran violated a ceasefire he announced hours earlier, and he was not happy with either country. German Chancellor echoed these concerns when referring to the situation in Gaza.
We do not lose sight of the bigger picture when it comes to the escalation of the Iranian nuclear program. We take the liberty of asking critical questions about what goal Israel wants to achieve in the Gaza Strip. And we call for humane treatment of the people in the Gaza Strip, especially women, children, and the elderly.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was invited to the summit dinner, but won't join the core defence talks. The summit closes with unity on paper, but questions remain on whether all nations will meet the 5% pledge, or whether some, like Spain, will simply step aside.
Thank you for joining us, not only here in the room, but as you've heard.
And with more on the subject of the NATO summit, we're joined live from the event by our very own Anita Sharma. Nice to see you.
Great to be with you, James, as always.
Anita, what did the NATO members accomplish today?
It seems like they accomplished quite a bit, James. On three fronts, it looks like the NATO members are moving forward. Got my trusty notes here just to make sure I get it all right and accurate for you. Firstly, they've updated their defense production action plan. This essentially is aimed at helping allies produce more and also faster amid what they call a very changing and evolving security environment. Secondly, what they've been able to accomplish is create NATO's first commercial space collaboration. Here's where they're going to be working very closely with industry to essentially develop commercial solutions. So again, they can move forward quickly and adapt to circumstances, whether they be peaceful circumstances or in times of crises. But the key thing here is that they will be working with industry to move forward as far as technology is concerned. Thirdly, James, we're looking at NATO's Rapid Adoption Action Plan. This will boost the adoption and or the integration of new technology products that will be used for defense across all military platforms. So essentially, they say all three fronts here will help them quite fervently move forward.
Now, speaking about defense, it was the main focus of the summit. What happened there? Can you give us more details?
You're absolutely right. Before the Iran conflict had started, this was supposed to be the heart of it, essentially getting NATO members to agree to commit 5% of their GDP towards military spending, something Trump called for the minute he returned to the White House. Now, first there was consternation amongst some key NATO members who said 5%, forget that. But they soon realized, look, they need the U.S. support and they need the U.S. in a leadership position. So, according to Mark Rutte, the new Secretary General, and of course the former Dutch Prime Minister, we're here in The Hague, Netherlands, he says, and essentially he's taking credit for the fact that he was able to corral the members and agree to a 5% plan. Let me break this down for you. He says that with the help of the U.S. NATO ambassador, they've crafted a plan where by 2035, they will commit, the NATO members will commit 3.5% of their GDP towards military spending. 1.5% to go. How are they going to come up with that? Well, Rutte says that is where they're going to look at, quote unquote, non-traditional areas to move forward and meet that 5% target. We're talking here about expenditure with, say, infrastructure or cybersecurity. So on all fronts, it looks like all parties will be happy. The NATO members will be able to likely show that they're increasing their spending in areas that they would be increasing their spending anyway, irrespective of NATO. And Trump can essentially walk away with a win. And real quick, James, there's a lot of talk here about that social media message that, or the message, the text that Mark Rutte had allegedly sent to Donald Trump. Well, Mark Rutte now says, yeah, he did send that text message to Trump, where he essentially congratulated the president and said, look, everyone's on board with this 5%. Way to go, President Trump. We can't wait to see you here in the Netherlands. There was a lot of bewilderment here as to whether Rutte did send that text message, but there you go. He proudly stands by sending that message. And real quick, James, on the Trump front, we've learned that the beast is here in The Hague, as well as the U.S. president has touched down in Amsterdam, and he's making his way over to the Royal Palace. Incidentally, the one Royal Palace where the Dutch royal family actually resides. So he'll be going over there for a very elaborate dinner tonight. I'd like to be a fly on the wall in that room, in the dining room.
Thank you very much, Anita.
You bet. My pleasure, James.
On the sidelines of the NATO summit is planned meeting between Trump and Erdogan. To discuss this topic, we're joined live from Moscow, Russia by John Kavlich, senior editor at the Issue Insight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, how consequential is the prospective meeting between the two leaders, President Erdogan and President Trump?
Well, it's important to know that the meeting's scheduled for about 11:30 this evening. So it's scheduled after the dinner for heads of state and heads of government. So President Erdogan, may be a bit tired because he's going to be on his time zone. President Trump is basically going to have 6 hours ahead. So he should still have a lot of energy. But there are a lot of tripwires in their discussions because President Erdogan has been the most vocal head of state, bar none, with respect to issues relating to Gaza and with respect to issues relating to Iran. And those are two countries where President Trump and President Erdogan, in terms of strategy, diverge greatly. The areas where there is potential for cooperation is in terms of Turkey's re-engagement with the United States vis-a-vis the F-35 program that the Trump administration removed Turkey from because Turkey accepted S-400 anti-aircraft batteries from Russia. There's a potential maybe they can work something out because Turkey gave the U.S. over $1 billion in deposit. There's some issues relating to F-16s. And Turkey, as far as the military expenditures, they're about at 2%. But it's important to remember Turkey has the second largest military in NATO at 2%. So I think there's going to be a lot of kumbaya tonight and tomorrow with respect to meeting this 3% and then meeting the 5 with the 3.5%. But in the end, I think there's going to be a lot more pushback where these countries are going to promise whatever they need to promise to Donald Trump because they know they've got 3.5 years to deal with him. So when the target date is to 2030, 2035, that's long after President Trump will be out of the White House.
Now, what is the extent of Turkish influence on the Iran policy of the U.S.?
Almost none. And it's not for lack of trying. President Erdogan, Turkey has solid relationships commercially, economically, financially, politically with Iran. But in this particular case, President Trump isn't listening to anyone because this is basically about testosterone. This is about who can look tough, who can be tough. And President Trump has the tools to look tough and, more importantly, be tough. He can drop things on people, which in this case he did. And President Erdogan had sought dialogue. President Erdogan had done some back channeling to try to get the U.S. and Iran together. But in the end, it didn't come together. President Trump wanted to bomb Iran from the time he got into the Oval Office on the 20th of January. And With respect to then issues relating to Israel and Gaza, again, President Erdogan is very far apart from President Trump on that. So my guess is that President Erdogan is going to use this particular meeting, which again, late at night, can't expect it to go all that long, but he's probably going to avoid those areas where they disagree, try to focus on the areas where they agree, maybe move forward the invitations. President Trump invited President Erdogan to Washington. President Erdogan invited President Trump to Turkey. They both have accepted. Maybe there'll be something there. More talking about maybe another get-together, whether it's in each other's country between now and September for the United Nations General Assembly. Maybe talk about the G20 in November. But President Erdogan is going to try to keep it light for now. So I think, we shouldn't expect a tremendous amount to come out other than good to see you, great talk, and we got to continue to talk. Because, and this is, if I may, the wild card is this. At the dinner tonight, President Zelensky of Ukraine will be at that dinner. If President Zelensky does what President Zelensky normally does, which is basically do everything possible to shove himself into whatever it is. If he does something to just get President Trump upset, if he just charges at him, if he just starts saying, you got to do this, and then President Trump goes to see President Erdogan, now we've got a problem. So President Trump has a very, very, what we call a hair trigger when it comes to Ukraine and President Zelensky. I just hope President Zelensky doesn't set him off, and then it'll be like a domino effect with every other meeting he has.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Finland is rapidly reinforcing its eastern border with Russia, building new defenses and hosting NATO operations as fears grow of being drawn into a broader conflict.
Finland is stepping up its military preparedness along the 1,340-kilometre border with Russia. Since joining NATO in 2022 in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Helsinki has increased defence spending, revived Cold War-era training practices, and begun constructing a 200-kilometre-long border fence topped with barbed wire, cameras and motion sensors. Reservists near Lapinranta, just 160 kilometres from St. Petersburg, are now training with military-grade surveillance drones used by NATO members. Finland has also announced plans to stockpile landmines and restrict Russian citizens from buying property or flying drones in sensitive areas.
This is only 16 kilometers to Russia from here, so we are that close actually. And that makes you think, so what if they decide to come to this side of the border as well, just like they went to Ukraine, without telling, or just like they came here in 1939.
The Finnish government warns that Russian military infrastructure is being reactivated near the border. Satellite images show early-stage construction at old garrisons, though Helsinki downplays the immediate threat. Still, a national defence report last year pointed to a heightened risk of armed conflict and cited Moscow's ambition to create a buffer zone from the Arctic to southern Europe. Beyond security concerns, the collapse of cross-border movement has impacted Finland's eastern economy. Tourist towns that once welcomed millions of Russians now face high unemployment.
Well, when Russian clients were still coming, let's say there used to be a lot of folks in town all the time. Parking spaces were tight. Restaurant seats were always full, which was definitely a good thing for entrepreneurs.
Finnish Russian families are also split by the closure of crossings since late 2023, when Helsinki accused Moscow of weaponizing migration. While both governments insist they pose no threat to each other, Finland is hosting NATO's new Northern Command in Mikkeli, just 2 hours from the border, with personnel from the US, UK and other alliance members.
A Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro has left 9 people dead and more than 150 people injured as authorities report damage to civilian infrastructure, including a passenger train.
At least 9 people have been killed and more than 160 others injured. following a Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Authorities say the strike ignited a large fire and caused damage to civilian infrastructure and a passenger train. Residents say they took cover in bomb shelters.
I was not at home. Thank God I was not at home, and my child was not at home. My child was in the kindergarten in the shelter, and I was next door.
I was in the 4th hospital, treating my leg. I had a doctor's appointment, and here were the children. They saw it all. Now they're in the 72nd school. There's a bomb shelter there. They ran there.
Officials say 12 of the wounded are in serious condition, and that 18 children are among the injured. This attack comes as other Russian attacks were reported in the cities of Samar, which left 2 people dead, and Sumy, which killed 3 people, including an 8-year-old boy. Authorities report that 3 more people were injured. Emergency response teams have been dispatched to the affected area, where a fire is reported to have broken out.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky have announced a military co-production agreement during a visit in London. The announcement comes amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and follows a recent deadly attack on Kyiv.
In a show of deepening defence ties, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced a landmark military co-production agreement after they met in London on Monday. The deal, the first of its kind between the two nations, was disclosed at Downing Street, where the leaders also addressed Ukrainian troops receiving training under Operation Interflex.
I'm really proud that this afternoon we're able to announce an industrial military co-production agreement, the first of its kind so far as Ukraine and the UK are concerned, which will be a massive step forward now in the contribution that we can continue to make, and is really a symbol of not only our joint work in this conflict, but the 100-year agreement that we have put in place.
Zelensky expressed gratitude for Britain's continued support and emphasised the value of shared military experience.
It's a very historic moment. It was, and the good result of today's our meeting is this additional decision of co-production. And I think it will be very strong and will strengthen both nations. It's very important, yes, to share our experience, your experience, by the way, first of all, your experience on the battlefield and your knowledge and experience during Interflex training missions.
At this point, not many details about the specifics of the agreement have been released so far. The London visit also included meetings with King Charles III and parliamentary leaders, and comes just a day after a deadly overnight assault on Kyiv, one of the most intense attacks in recent months, that left at least 9 people dead and at least 33 others injured, involving a barrage of more than 350 missiles and drones. While Ukraine's air defences intercepted the majority, the attack caused significant destruction, including the partial collapse of a residential building.
The ceasefire may be on paper, but the fear hasn't faded, despite a deal announced by US President Donald Trump to end the 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran. The situation on ground tells a different story. Our team is at Astara border crossing, where people continue to evacuate into Azerbaijan.
The Astara checkpoint remains open and busy. People from Italy, Egypt, Russia, US and beyond are crossing into Azerbaijan from Iran amid Israel-Iran tensions. Despite a ceasefire deal announced by US President Donald Trump to end the so-called 12-day war between Israel and Iran, tensions have not fully stopped. The agreement reached after Iran launched missiles at a US airbase in Qatar. US President announced that both countries agreed to a phased ceasefire. Ceasefire declared, but not fully implemented. Israeli military said it had identified missiles launched from Iran. Iran's military promptly denied launching any missile after the ceasefire took effect. Yet, Israel's defense minister Israel Katz announced he had ordered strikes on Tehran, claiming Iran broke the deal. And here at Astara, people are still on the move. We have seen citizens of multiple countries, so while diplomats talk of de-escalation, the evacuation here is ongoing. The ceasefire may be signed, but for those living under the potential fire line, the situation remains disturbing.
In Ashgabat, the Iranian foreign minister held talks with Turkmen officials. The discussions focused on the Middle East crisis and humanitarian cooperation. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimoziner has the details.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi paid an official visit to Turkmenistan, where he held talks focused on bilateral cooperation. According to Turkmenistan's Minister of Foreign Affairs, the meeting in Ashgabat addressed the situation in the Middle East. The foreign ministers of Iran and Turkmenistan discussed expanding cooperation between the two countries, as well as regional and international issues. Araghchi expressed gratitude to the President of Turkmenistan for his strong support of the Iranian people and for contributions to humanitarian efforts. The foreign ministry noted that Turkmenistan stands firmly against the use of force in resolving international conflicts, advocating instead for peaceful solutions based on the UN Charter and universally recognized principles of international law. Ashgabat also expressed its readiness to engage in dialogue with all interested parties to help resolve the situation in the Middle East and ensure peace in the region. Following recent Israeli airstrikes on Iran, Turkmenistan has increased security measures along its border with the neighboring country. The Turkmen-Iranian border stretches approximately 1,100 kilometers. Over the past 10 days, Turkmenistan has received requests from representatives of 52 countries to help evacuate their citizens. The foreign ministry stated that all such requests are being processed promptly in coordination with diplomatic missions based in Ashgabat. Also, Turkmenistan confirmed its commitment to international humanitarian efforts and guarantees the safe transit of foreign nationals through its territory. Fariza Kalimurzaeva, A News in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Now joining us live from Almaty, Kazakhstan is Nurbulat Niashambayev, here to share his insights on the regional response to Trump's announcement of a ceasefire as the situation involves Iran and Israel. The announcement by Trump, it is said, was met with a collective sigh of relief across the wider region. Earlier, some analysts have raised concerns about the potential disruption to energy supply chains and the broader risk of spillover. What is your assessment of this situation?
I think it's pretty hard to identify exactly what the move looks like, next move looks like. But I think it shows us how the global system is integrated, how the conflict in one part of the world impacts the whole world. Therefore, I think it's a very good time to analyze, to see how the interdependence in terms of economy works among the countries. Therefore, my vision is still Middle East will be one of the places where the conflict is going on, because still there are more questions than answers. Therefore, I think the world community should take very important steps in order to secure all the energy supply systems in order to avoid any escalation in the upcoming period.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Azerbaijan has achieved a major milestone in securing its own energy future with the record-breaking completion of the 8 November power station in Mingachevir. This landmark project not only strengthens Azerbaijan's domestic energy independence, but also significantly enhances its ability to support Europe's energy security. Let's explore how and why this facility is set to reshape regional energy dynamics.
The 8 November power station, inaugurated by President Ilham Aliyev, stands as the largest power plant built in independent Azerbaijan, adding a significant 1,880 megawatts to the country's energy system. The facility not only boosts domestic energy resilience, but also positions Mingachevir as the energy hub of the South Caucasus, generating over 40% of the country's electricity. Built in just 2 years, a remarkable feat compared to similar global projects taking 3 to 5 years, the station features advanced technology from key international partners, including Italy's Ansaldo Energia and China's Dongfang Electric. Massive equipment shipments overcame significant logistical challenges, with turbines and generators weighing hundreds of tons, transported from Italy and China via intricate routes, some bypassing geopolitical risks near Yemen.
8 noyabr stansiyasının istismara verilmesi birçok.
The commissioning of the 8 November power plant will serve multiple goals. As I mentioned earlier, it will increase the efficiency of our energy system, expand our potential, generation capacity, and significantly reduce conventional fuel consumption. Thus, this will create an opportunity for us to save natural gas, because everyone knows very well that there is a great demand for Azerbaijani gas in world markets today, and the more we save natural gas domestically, the greater our export potential will be.
Təbii qaza qənaət etsək, bir o qədər də ixrac imkanlarımız da artıracaq. Və energetika hər bir ölkənin milli təhlükəsizliyi məsələsidir. Bugün
Energy is a matter of national security for every country. Today, we can all clearly see the consequences of threats to energy infrastructure around the world, especially in Europe and other regions. Azerbaijan is among the countries contributing to European energy security today, and it is no coincidence that the European Union rightly calls Azerbaijan a reliable partner and pan-European gas supplier. Because today, Azerbaijani gas is exported to 12 countries through pipelines. 10 of them are European countries.
Qaz kəmərləri vasitəsilə ixrac edilir. Onlardan onu Avropa ölkəsidir.
The power station significantly reduces fuel consumption, saving up to 1 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually, and slashes carbon emissions by 2 million tons each year. Its efficiency rate now stands at an impressive 55.5%, compared to the previous 38.5%. Italy's Minister for Enterprises, Adolfo Urso, highlighted the project's environmental and strategic importance.
This facility, which has an energy capacity of 2,000 megawatts, will reduce emissions into the air by 50% compared to the past. This also means protection of the environment. This is a very important step because it further strengthens our cooperation in the energy sector. A strategic step is being taken to strengthen energy security. And of course, thanks to this, other industrial and production sectors will also develop. This cooperation is taking place within the framework of the strategic partnership initiated between our leaders, President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni.
Ansaldo Energia's CEO, Fabrizio Fabri, emphasized the future-ready capabilities of the plant.
The Republic of Azerbaijan plays a crucial role in European energy security. Thanks to its strategic location and natural resources and consistent energy policy, its position as a natural gas supplier, combined with effort and modernized infrastructure, has made it a central actor in global energy cooperation. Together, we are building a model to energy cooperation in both secure and sustainable focus on technology and human factor. We look forward to new opportunities that this partnership will unlock. Today is not the end of a project. It is the beginning of a new chapter and a shared journey.
Chinese firm Dongfang Electric also played a crucial role, providing advanced utility boilers, further solidifying China's partnership with Azerbaijan.
I am sure that this new plant will become an exemplary project for regional energy cooperation. I would like to note that Dongfang will continue to operate in the Azerbaijani market and will continue to provide comprehensive support to your country's energy transition with all technologies included in industrial chain, including hydropower, solar, wind and gas power generation, and continue its activities to further expand the friendly and cooperative relations between China and Azerbaijan.
Strategically named to commemorate Azerbaijan's victory in the Second Karabakh War, the 8 November power station marks a new chapter in Azerbaijan's energy leadership. At a time when energy security dominates global agendas, this milestone reinforces Azerbaijan's role as a vital partner to Europe and a model for regional stability. The developments we see today in Mingachevir could set the stage for even greater regional cooperation in the years ahead.
A business forum held in Tashkent brought together over 150 officials and business leaders from Uzbekistan and Turkey to enhance trade and economic cooperation. The event focused on expanding bilateral trade, which reached $457 million in early 2024. Participants emphasized goals to boost trade volume to $10 billion in the long term, with priority sectors including defense, energy, infrastructure and others. Agreements were signed to support new partnerships and investment. Georgia's external merchandise trade reached $9.79 billion from the start of the year to May 2025. This marks a 13.3% increase compared to the same period last year. According to the National Statistics Office, exports totaled $2.59 billion, while imports rose to $7.19 billion. The trade deficit stood at $4.6 billion, making up 47% of total trade turnover. But that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.